period is Private Members' Day. The first motion to be discussed is that as proposed by Mr. John Gogo, the MLA for Lethbridge West, and the Assembly will be debating a motion which relates to federal funding for the enhancement of child care options to parents who choose to care for their children in their own homes. After that, in the second hour, a bill being number 204, the Farmland Vendor Financing Act, as sponsored by the member for Cypress Redcliffe, Alan Highland, will be discussed. This evening, the House will not sit, as the House will stand adjourned so that members of all political parties may meet with representatives of the Alberta Teachers Association. Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Agriculture, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table the 1987 annual report of the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association.
Mr. Speaker, I would file with the Assembly a short bibliography on pay equity legislation and a case study of the implementation of the same for the information of the Honourable Minister of Employment and Career Development.
Introduction of special guests.
Premier.
I'm pleased today to introduce to you and through you to the legislature a former member of the legislature, a former MLA for Edmonton Whitemud. He's sitting in your gallery, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Peter Knack. I ask the members to welcome him to the legislature in normal fashion.
Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure, sir, to introduce to you and through you to members of the Legislative Assembly a number of members of our senior staff of the Department of Agriculture. And let me begin by introducing them and asking them to rise to receive the warm welcome after the introduction of the group. And I will begin with Mr. David Yakubuski, Director of Financial and Administrative Services, and his senior staff members, John Pace, Rick Pixley, Rose Matisco, Charles McFarlane, and Bob Brickman. And I would ask them all to rise to receive the warm welcome of the Legislative Assembly.
Member for Chinook, followed by the Minister of Culture and Multiculturalism.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly 17 grade 6, 7, and 8 students from the New Brigden School, my hometown. They are accompanied by their teacher, Gary Tarback, parent Larry Ness, and bus driver Dean Heron. They are seated in the members' gallery, and I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly 8 students from the Exshaw Junior High School from the constituency of Banff Cochrane. They are accompanied by their principal, Mr. Carl Dick, and by Mr. and Mrs. Bristow. Mr. Speaker, the young students today are representative of the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Good Stony bands of the people of the Stony Nation. Would they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly?
Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly 17 students from the Adult Development Centre. They are accompanied by their teachers, Barb Foxall, Scott Klein, Diane Shrimpton, and Jennifer Burrett. I would ask that they would rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Chair recognizes the member for Calgary-Egmont. Well, how often do I get to do that? It's my pleasure to introduce to members of the Assembly 47 students from Fairview Junior High School in the constituency of Calgary-Egmont, but with considerable representation from Calgary Fish Creek. Accompanying the students today, who are most of them appropriately attired in Flames jerseys, Mr. Jorstad, the principal, Elaine Schmidt, Christine Laurel, Anne-Marie Delisle, Harry Alanda. I'd ask that they rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the new Labour Relations Code, among other things, seeks to ban, support picketing and the mounting of boycotts by trade unions or any other interested people, be it church people, be it grandmothers, grandfathers, students, or whatever. Mr. Speaker, it's an unbelievable measure without precedent north of Mexico on this continent and unknown to any jurisdiction I'm aware of among Western democracies. Mr. Speaker, it affects liberties that people take for granted in a democratic society, such as freedom of expression and freedom of association. My question to the Premier, why is the government bringing in these draconian measures in this province today?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member, since the bill is before the House, should raise his points before the House, and perhaps he can convince the legislature, and there would be a change.
Mr. Speaker, this is a serious matter, and it's not to be taken flippantly when you're taking people's rights away. This Premier is the Premier of the province. They're bringing in this bill, and we want to get some answers, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
We've been contacting other Labour experts and authorities from jurisdictions all over North America to find...
Let's get on with the question.
Precedent, Mr. Speaker. My question is, we have found none. My question is to the Premier, what role model is he using in bringing in such a big hammer to interfere in the lives of individual citizens? Right. Who else treats their citizens this way?
And Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member is making a representation that would be something he should do, and the bill is before the House, and I would expect him to do it.
Mr. Speaker, when this bill is before the House, it may be too late. We're taking people's liberties away.
That's right.
But my question is to the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker. The chances are that the courts will save us from these draconian measures because it probably violates Section 2 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. My question to the Attorney General is, will the Attorney General, under the guise of common sense, save everyone a lot of time and trouble by referring this provision to the courts under the Judicature Act before second reading debate?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is attempting to use question period to debate the principles of legislation. That's quite out of order, and Mr. Speaker, it's not the intention of the government to refer legislation to courts before even having had second reading in this legislature. That would be quite unusual. And well, if the honourable member for Vegreville says, who says we will have second reading? If we have no second reading, then the law will not come into place. For the benefit of the honourable member for Vegreville, before a law can become effective, it has to have 3 readings in the legislature and
Thank you, Honourable Minister.
When Vegreville quiets down, then his leader will chance for the last supplementary. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, this is a type, frankly, of arrogance and flippancy when we take people's rights away that people expect from this government. But I want to come back to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, because clearly there's a possibility that this does violate the Charter of Rights. And I want to have the Premier make the commitment here and now that the government will never abuse its powers under Section 333 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to ram this legislation through on the notwithstanding clause. Will he make that commitment to the people of Alberta today?
Do it.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the NDP doesn't seem to understand the process in the legislature. He's already told the House that when we deal with the bill may be too late. Now, by what stretch of the imagination can that be a fact? Certainly, the bill is not going to be passed until we deal with it, so what would be too late about waiting to deal with it? I have no idea where he is getting his position from. He now wants me to make an assurance under the Constitution and the Charter of Rights about something that has not been passed. I just don't understand where he's coming from, Mr. Speaker, but it's been typical of the question period lately.
Thank you. Supplementary, Edmonton Goldbar.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the people of Canada are watching this action with great interest. To the Premier, is the Premier now then planning on opting out of the Charter of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in order to protect Section 81 of Bill 22?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I really dealt with it with the last supplementary from the Leader of the NDP party, but the member for Goldbar, I'll just say again, she's really placing a hypothetical situation before the House. And we don't deal with hypothetical situations. We deal with facts.
The Leader of the Opposition, order, please, Honourable Member. The designation is to whom?
To the member from Calgary Mountain View, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to the Premier. Yesterday, the Blood Tribe Chief and Council sent a letter to the Premier in which they expressed their concern about an apparent unwillingness or inability of authorities to solve a number of tragic deaths of Blood Tribe people. The letter specifically mentioned 4 cases in which foul play was suspected or determined as being the cause of death. And I'd like to ask the Premier this afternoon if he's taken any steps in response to this letter. In particular, could he give the Assembly a status update report on police investigations into the 4 cases mentioned in the letter?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the letter has not been received by me, so I am unable to respond to the honourable member's questions. I must say, though, it's disappointing when a letter is purportedly written to me and then is made public before I can even receive it.
Called the CC
Well,
method.
Mr. Speaker, I spoke with representatives of the Band Council this morning who assured me that it had been faxed to the Premier's office this morning. The members of the Tribe Council have indicated that they're prepared to put up a $5,000 reward for evidence leading to the conviction of those individuals responsible for those crimes. Would the Premier give assurance to the Assembly today, as evidence of his government's concern, that he would match that amount that the Band Council has put up for those rewards?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'm going to receive and read the letter and respond to it. I will not take the letter through the honourable member. I think it's only fair, if a letter has been written to me, that I receive it, have a chance to assess it, and then respond to it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Premier, this year is the 10th anniversary of the report by Mr. Justice Kirby in which regarding Native people and the administration of justice in the provincial courts of Alberta. Can the Premier assure this Assembly that all of the recommendations that were contained in that report 10 years ago have been implemented by the government?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, for much of that time I wasn't here, but I would say that that's something that the Honourable Attorney General would be dealing with and may wish to respond or take it as notice.
Go ahead.
Some final supplementary, Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, in the letter to the Premier, the Band Council have asked the Premier to set up a public inquiry because they still don't believe that the administration of justice is fair in the province. What evidence will it take to convince the Premier to agree to pursue this matter by setting up a public inquiry as asked for by the Band Council?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I understand the honourable member has his questions written out in advance, but he's got to be able to adjust a little bit from what he's practiced, and that is that the letter has not been received, and therefore I can't respond to it. I will, as soon, obviously he makes it sound like it's an important issue, and I will certainly deal with it that way.
Thank you. Member for Calgary Buffalo, related to this letter, which may or may not arrive.
Well, I'm wondering whether the Attorney General has been made aware of this issue and whether he has done anything to investigate and ensure that an adequate review is being made of these unsolved deaths.
Mr. Speaker, I'm advised that I was handed a copy of the letter in question, which was copied to my office as I came into question period today. That was the first notice I had that any letter had been mailed, other than having read the story in today's Calgary Herald briefly as well as I returned to my office shortly before question period today. So I have not had an opportunity of reading the letter, and until I do, I can't really respond effectively, and I will, of course, give it serious consideration.
To the member for Little Bow.
Supplementary to the Attorney General, in responding to the letter, would it be the intention of the Attorney General to meet with Chief Roy Fox directly to discuss the details of this matter?
Mr. Speaker, once again, I have no idea, from not having had a chance to read the letter, whether or not such a meeting has been requested. I have noted from glancing at it that copies were sent to a large number of people, but until such time as I have had the chance to review that and ascertain whether a meeting has in fact been requested, I can't respond to the honourable member, but it will be given serious consideration in view of the serious nature of the allegations which are reported in the Calgary Herald, which obviously had a copy of the letter before the Premier.
Leader of the Liberal Caucus, followed by the member for Little Bow.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is also to the Premier, and while welcoming his new $20 million water supply assistance program, Mr. Speaker, the public of Alberta cannot help but notice that this government, amongst a few in Canada, still allows the use of over 1 million barrels a day of fresh water to be pumped down to chase out oil rather than use fossil water. In addition, Mr. Speaker, under the Premier's direction, this government has shut down one of the world's leading weather modification programs, one similar to one that operates, Mr. Speaker, and is publicly funded in North Dakota, Utah, California, and even such exotic places as Palm Springs. My question to the Premier, in view of his government's own 1986 Alberta Research Council report on weather modification's conclusion, and I read, Mr. Speaker, it's very short. The highlight of the recent program has been the success of the rain augmentation project. The aspect of weather modification technology has been solidly demonstrated on a limited scale. Could the Premier then tell the House whether or not he is now ready to reinstate this program?
Mr. Speaker, the responsibility for water in the province is the Minister of Environment, and to some extent in the crop modification, weather modification for crops is the Minister of Agriculture. I'd ask the Minister of Environment to respond to the member.
First, Chair is again concerned about repetitious questions, which are almost the same, because Having run through our friendly computer, we have this matter, the same issue being raised by the same member on March the 30th, again on April the 13th, certain ramifications again on April the 18th, and also again with April the 19th. So there's real concern from the chair again about repetitious questions. Supplementary question.
Order, Mr. Speaker. We'll take that up afterwards. Yeah, it's all right. May I go on now? It's a supplemental, or is the minister going to answer?
You're not going to answer?
I'm sorry.
Mr. Speaker, I might respond to the question. The reason the member continues to raise it is he doesn't like the answers. And the answer, of course, is that there are, in terms of the weather modification, there are many opinions, both within the scientific sector of this province and within the agricultural sector of the province, about the pros and the cons of weather modification.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary is well known, Associate Minister's idea of living in the 19th century, but the point of the view, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier again, was he aware that the 1986 Alberta Research Council report on weather modification and stated that it was at that time that we employed 54 scientists, well known around the world, and exported business to Greece and to the Mediterranean, involving $10 million a year in income to these firms.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member should know that the program was a pilot program, that was a great deal of work done on it. Then, as any pilot program must, it comes to an end and has to be assessed. And then, once it is assessed, whether or not it should be carried out on a full-scale program, that assessment's being done.
Mr. Speaker, possibly to you as well as to the Premier, those earlier questions are on hail suppression. This is on water creation. They're two different things, Mr. Speaker.
Please
well, I'll do that later. It's another point. What I would like to ask the Premier then, is he aware that without the weather modification camp creating snowpack in the mountains, that Mr. Kowalski's dam won't be worth a damn next winter? Is he aware of that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you think of what he just said, that is really silly.
Mr. Speaker, there are none so blind who will not see. Province needs this program now, Mr. Speaker. So will the Premier accept my challenge, Mr. Speaker? Will the Premier accept my challenge, and any other ministers he has, to find just one reputable scientist that says that the weather modification program is not justified? Find me one. Would you accept that challenge?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, if there's one thing I don't need to do is spend my time trying to respond to challenges from the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party. He's got plenty of challenges of his own.
Member for Leader of the Representative Caucus, followed by the member for Wainwright, then Edmonton Avonmore and Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Social Services, and over the past week I've had more phone calls with regards to repatriation of Native children back to the Reserve. Could the Minister indicate whether there has been some reconsideration of that policy during the last week or two?
Mr. Speaker, the permanency planning project that affects all children that are wards of the Department of Social Services go on. And I might add to the honourable member that it does not necessarily mean that in the case of Native children that those children will go back to the Reserve.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate whether there has been any further consideration of a policy in the Department with regards to this matter that leaves those children, Native children, that are now presently in non-Native homes there, but looking at repatriation or repatriation program in terms of the future adoptions that may occur in terms of Native children?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note that in terms of the workers in the department and also the professionals who are hired to work with the children to assess the potentially best home for them, are doing just that. They are doing their best, and in a number of instances there will be a recommendation that children will go to the Native community if there are offers of permanent homes there for them, and in other instances they will be placed in a non-Native community, sometimes with foster parents who have indicated that they would like to adopt. But certainly the policy has to speak to the best interests of the child and not the various adults who have wishes to make a permanent home for that child.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, could the Minister indicate whether any direction has gone to the child guardian in terms of putting a greater priority on the child's needs, the Native child that is going to be uprooted in many instances from homes where they've lived since they were 4 or 5 months of age to now where they're 8, 10, 11 years of age? Has there been any direction given by the Minister to the child guardian as to placing the needs of the child as a top priority?
Mr. Speaker, in all instances, and it's certainly the direction from the Minister and the Deputy Minister and senior staff, that the needs of the child must come first and foremost.
Supplementary, Edmonton Highlands, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand the delicacy of this matter. I wonder if the Minister would advise the Assembly whether or not she's ascertained through her department officials if the assumption that the children should be repatriated in fact is proceeding, or if they're being consulted first. In other words, if the assumption is that they ought to be repatriated as opposed to consulting with the people and the foster parents first.
Mr. Speaker, again, the assumption must be to look for where there is an indication of support for a permanent home for the child. And I think the honourable member has quite appropriately said it is a very delicate situation, and one that is often difficult to speak to because very personal information is brought forward about various families who are interested in the children, and that is not always able to be shared with the public.
Edmonton Gold Bar.
Mr. Speaker, yes, the Children's Guardian has been certainly involved in this process. Will the Minister now move to place the Children's Guardian as an adjunct of the Ombudsman's office in order, Mr. Speaker, that the Guardian's actions on behalf of this child and other children could be objective and removed from social service regulations?
Mr. Speaker, I think it is an unfair assumption on the honourable member for Gold Bar's part to say that the Children's Guardian is not operating in an objective manner. Certainly their office has considerable resources, and they're independent resources in terms of information by professionals that they wish to hire to give them advice on any particular case. Obviously, as well, information comes forward from the department, from the workers who have worked with particular children, and foster parent families. And at all times, it has been my direction to make sure that a proper process is in place and that all parties are heard from. Where there is a disagreement, unfortunately, some of those cases may end up in court. But as well, Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that there has been an ongoing discussion about the various parties that relate to children and responsibilities that they have, and we are accepting advice from many quarters in terms of how others see that process working best.
Member for Cypress Redcliffe, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary question to the Minister. I wonder if the Minister has considered any challenge of any legal action that's happened so far and to see if the best interest of the child has been carried forward after the judge has said that he agrees with the child welfare officer, or whatever the right title is. Have we challenged any of those findings to see if indeed all do agree that the best interest of the child is front and forward?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware that in terms of where there has been a court decision that the department has appealed. I believe that there are appeals possibly being launched by families who believe that the courts have not rendered the best decision possible.
Okay, the member for Wainwright, followed by Edmonton Avonmore, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture. I was very pleased to hear the Premier announce that there would be a water supply assistance program. And concerning the agriculture part of it, could the Minister outline the changes that are being made in the dugout pumping program?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to underscore the honourable member's comments and indicate that the Premier did announce this morning a $20 million program as it relates to water supplies within the province of Alberta. As the honourable member is probably aware, it does have a number of components, and I'm sure that the Honourable Minister of Environment and the Minister of Transportation and Utilities would like to supplement mine, because the overall question relates to an agricultural component as it relates to the $20 million program. Ours specifically is close to $4 million, Mr. Speaker, whereby we are going to purchase an additional 10 units of pumping equipment, that is pipes and pumping equipment, so that farmers will have access to greater equipment usage. In addition to that, we are reducing the rental cost of that by some 50%, and we are implementing a dugout program for the construction of new dugouts and the rehabilitation of dugouts.
Questions, Honourable Minister. Thank you. Member for Wainwright, supplementary.
Thank you. I wonder if the Minister could give us some indication of how much he expects this program to be used.
Mr. Speaker, our projections as it relates to the specific program under the Department of Agriculture indicate that there will be about 3,500 landowners participating in it. The projections are that much higher for the Department of Environment, and I'm sure the Minister of Environment would like to supplement that.
Question from member for Wainwright. It's all right, honourable member. It's being looked after.
Could the Minister then tell us where and when we could get the information for the program and when it'll be available?
Mr. Speaker, this is one item that was not included in the press release. But I'm happy to share with honourable members that district agriculturalists, the regional offices of environment and transportation will have brochures hopefully next week and application forms, in the event not next week, the week thereafter at the very latest, but we are hoping to have it available next week. There is some retroactivity provisions within the program also, so that the greatest possible number of rural dwellers can apply and make use of this very worthwhile $20 million program.
Final supplementary, Wainwright. All right, member for Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciating the timeliness of this important program, I would just like to ask the Minister, in the case that individuals may desperately need some provisions of the program, for example, drilling a new well or the Farm Water Grant program, but they're unable to afford it for a variety of obvious economic reasons, is the Minister prepared to be flexible in considering cases of undue hardship?
Mr. Speaker, if I can use the words of the Honourable Minister of Environment when we were discussing and putting this program together, that we are going to exercise the greatest flexibility possible to make sure that we are as helpful as we possibly can. The Honourable Member is aware that there is also provisions under the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Assistance from the federal government which can in some cases supplement our program, and it's a very generous program, Mr. Speaker, acknowledging the water shortages that we are facing.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
To the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is this the budget, $20 million budget, transferred from another department or another part of his budget, or is this new money? Where, in other words, where did you get the money? Did you cut one program back, or is this new money?
Mr. Speaker, if I can reinforce what the Premier indicated this morning when he announced the program, whereby he indicated this is $20 million of new money. We are going to use that money from our existing budgets, but as we use that money, we will be coming forward to the provincial treasurer for new money. The $20 million is new money.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark, Bow Valley, Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General has stated in a letter dated April 6, 1988, in the month of February 1988, the Maintenance Enforcement Program successfully collected on 42.4% of all registered files. A file is considered to be a successful collection when some monies are recovered. Will the Minister advise whether or not the number of cases in which all monies have been collected, that is, the number of cases that are not in arrears, is less than 15%, and if not, what is the percentage?
Mr. Speaker, that question would properly be on the order paper for the type of details that are requested. Right. However, I can advise that as of the end of March of this year, the total percentage collected on registered files was 46.1%. And the total percentage collected on automatically registered orders as of January the 1st, 87, totaled 88.8%. There are substantial amounts being collected on the automatically registered orders. Those are somewhat a smaller percentage than I may have indicated yesterday, but somewhat higher than I had indicated in my estimates remarks earlier in the session.
Mr. Speaker, I am aware of a case in which 2 NSF checks were written, the third was not NSF, and in which the Maintenance Enforcement Branch indicated that it would not take enforcement action as the debtor had demonstrated a willingness to cooperate. In view of the fact that 2 payments are outstanding, does the Minister really consider this maintenance enforcement?
Mr. Speaker, there were, as of January the 31st of this year, 21,783 files registered with the Maintenance Enforcement Program. New files are being registered on the average each month at the rate of 600 per month. It would be impossible for me to know the details of each of those 21,000 claims, which is obviously what the Honourable Member for Avonmore expects me to do. I regret that I cannot do that. However, there is a procedure available for efforts to enforce the orders, and the staff is working very hard on this program, which has been going now into its 3rd year of operation, which is increasingly effective, which is unique in Canada, and which is doing a great deal. For example, I can report that in the month of January of this year, $2 million was collected, of which $530,000 was collected on behalf of the Crown by way of recovery. And from a year-to-year date, from April of 87 to January of 88, over $16.2 million was collected. It's a very major program. And all honourable members have had, I'm sure, individual cases referred to them when they come to the attention of my office or of the Maintenance Enforcement Office. Obviously, every effort will be made. But the honourable members, if we're going to come in and ask if I know the details of each of those files, it's just impossible for me to respond. I will be happy to meet with and discuss individual files with individual MLAs, but I can't do it in question period the way the honourable member seeks the information.
Mr. Speaker, it is the policy and the discretion of workers that are under question. I would ask the Minister about another policy, and that is the rationale for stopping the monitoring of payments when a debtor applies to the courts to have the payments varied. Should the payments not be enforced until the court determines the new amount?
A debtor, of course, may file for a variation of an application which may alter the order and obtain a stay in the course of the hearing of the application for alteration. And that is within the discretion of the courts, and it would seem to me improper not to permit that to occur. At the same time, as I indicated to the honourable member yesterday, it would be my desire to have these matters dealt with as quickly and expeditiously as possible in order that maintenance orders be enforced. We have, in fact, in place in Alberta, the very best maintenance enforcement program in existence anywhere in Canada today.
That's right.
Well, the honourable member for Mountain View, as usual, makes loud noises. He doesn't like the answers when I give them. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, and the honourable leader of the Liberal Party, as usual, is starting his loud noises as well. But the thing that really the honourable members of the opposition don't like hearing the facts. And the fact is that we have the best maintenance program.
Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I was not talking about cases in which stays had been granted.
Final supplementary, please.
The letter from the Attorney General also states that 350 to 400 NSF checks are received every month and that creditors are not notified as it is not considered cost-effective. Does the minister really think it's okay that creditors are kept in the dark about the status of their file?
Mr. Speaker, every effort is made to keep all parties involved in this matter, in these matters, fully apprised of the situation. This is a program unique. It is working to the greatest possible effect. Obviously, there will be problems associated with individual files. Nothing is ever perfect in society. We are doing our very best, as are the maintenance enforcement officers. But I repeat what I said before. And furthermore, I can point out this, Mr. Speaker, that we make available to all other provinces information on how our program is working, and we seek their assistance on a reciprocal basis in order to obtain the most effective method of dealing with these cases when people move from province to province. And I only regret, Mr. Speaker, that the province of Manitoba refuses to share information with the government of Alberta in this whole process. Perhaps the...
Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Lethbridge West. All right, you waive your position then. Lethbridge West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Honourable Attorney General, does the Honourable Attorney General have any studies that indicate there's a correlation between the difficulties with maintenance enforcement program payments and the difficulties experienced by access in accordance with court orders by non-custodial parents?
Mr. Speaker, it's not necessary to have any studies to know that in many cases this is an issue that relates to the access of the other parent to children in custody matters. And I can say from years of experience in practice, it is one of the most difficult and unfortunate results of disputes between parents as to the custody of children that lead to the deprivation of those children, and I regret very much that that happens. Unfortunately, it is a fact of life, and if I could change human nature, I would be only too happy to do it. But the honourable member is quite correct that many of the cases of refusal to pay in maintenance cases come because of the refusal of access by the custodial parent to the non-custodial parent. And it is a regrettable situation. And unfortunately, it doesn't occur in all cases, but in those cases where it does, the person that suffers is the child. And that's the regrettable part of it.
Okay. No, waive your position. You're out of order, honourable member. The chair had recognized the honourable member that the honourable members passed, said to Lethbridge West. Therefore, that member speaks. So we're now on to the next issue. Edmund, another point of order, please, honourable member. That will be also another one. Thank you very much. Edmonton Meadowlark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, On June 30th...
Excuse me, honourable member. Would you care to withdraw your comment?
Ask me for my opinion, Mr. Speaker? Yeah. I said, what is the matter with the guy today, to the man down back? I don't think that's a withdrawal, Mr. Speaker.
Edmonton Meadowlark, please.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I can ask a supplemental of the Minister on that previous set of questions before I proceed with my complete set. Sorry. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, on June 30th, a privately run park and ride service at Edmonton's International Airport will be shut down by the federal government. This company employs 25 Albertans and offers an excellent and economic service to the public. My question is to the Premier. Will his government be intervening with the federal government on behalf of this small business enterprise?
Mr. Speaker, I haven't had it drawn to my attention. The honourable member has. I'll see if there's anything we could do. I believe it is a matter for the federal government, but if there's something we could do, we'll see. I must say, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to know the urgent matters that are now coming before the House.
So the Premier doesn't believe that the livelihood of a small business entrepreneur in Alberta is urgent, and 25 employees and taxpayers have to approach the government for help. The Premier said that it was a federal responsibility. Why would this government use that kind of ruse to not intervene in this case when it so consistently intervenes on behalf of large businesses?
That's not what I said, Mr. Speaker.
I wonder if a major corporation was having a problem, if the government would have to wait to be approached. How big does a business have to be before this government will represent its interests?
Again, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member didn't listen to my answer. He may have all of his supplementaries written out in advance and ignore the replies that he gets, but that was not what I answered to his initial question.
The Premier continues to diminish himself rather than diminishing the issue by responding in that manner. This is a very, very important issue. It's the tip of the iceberg. Could the Premier please tell us when his government will start making small business a priority, at least as much a priority as big business?
Mr. Speaker, we have had this sort of during question period debate, the honourable member and I, in the past, and I pointed out to him that the government supports small business in this province extremely well. We had a $1.1 billion program for small business, a long-term fixed-rate financing for them. We have the small business incubator programs. We have the Alberta Opportunity Company. There is the VENCAP financing. We have the change in the... I guess, Mr. Speaker, they asked the question, but they really don't like to hear the answer. And if we're talking about diminished things, Mr. Speaker, that's a sensitive area for the member from Edmonton Meadowlark.
Member for Vegreville.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to see the Premier's born-again willingness to tackle the federal government on issues that hurt average Albertans, and that being the case, I wonder if he will now take up the cause of the 180 rural communities and their citizens in Alberta that are losing their post offices because of his cousins in Ottawa.
Go for it, John.
Any review of the Hansard would show, Mr. Speaker, that question has been dealt with at least 2 or 3 times already in the House.
Chair recognizes the member for Bow Valley, followed by Calgary Forest Lawn, if there's time.
Mr. Speaker, my questions are also to do with the water supply assistance program that was announced this morning. And my first question is to the Minister of Transportation and Utilities, and it has to do with the water conveyance facilities assistance. In some cases in rural Alberta, water conveyance can only be done by truck. I wonder if this would include some assistance to people to truck water to fill dugouts.
Mr. Speaker, the program that we have under Transportation and Utilities is primarily a conveyance by way of water line. But I might ask my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Environment, to cover the point of trucking water, where trucking water may be the only route to go. If there's anything else I can respond to in the sense of the pipeline program, which is an enhancement of the existing program that is in place, Mr. Speaker, to assist where water is found, either by way of drilling or whatever the case may be, transporting that water to the ranchers and to the farmers of the area.
Mr. Speaker, it's indeed a pleasure to have an opportunity to respond to some of these questions, but the direct response to the member from Bow Valley's question is yes.
Thank you. I see, and the Minister of Public Lands, Forestry and Wildlife is not here, so I will direct this question to the Minister of Agriculture. I see that they have a program for drilling wells in grazing reserves. Will this also include provincially owned community pastures?
Speaker, the program that is directly under forestry will relate directly to grazing reserves. Our other programs are hopefully going to be applicable to grazing leases, where it is on public lands. Because as the honourable member is aware, there is a difference in the administration and the administrative levels within the reserves and the leases.
Further supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I was wondering, is there a sunset clause to this program? Is it a one-year program, or is the program until it rains, or is it a program that goes on from now?
Months when you go to the poll. Mr. Speaker, it varies with the various components under the program. There's 5 specific components. Some is for immediate use, some is for long-term use. It is going to last for a period of 3 years with some components. Other components are only in existence for a year. But I'm more than happy to send the honourable member, as we are putting together a pamphlet as it relates to the different components within the program itself.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions and to also allow the Attorney General to supplement information given earlier? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Supplementary Vegreville, followed by Cloverbar, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Agriculture, given that there's still a very good possibility that a number of livestock producers won't be able to put their cattle out on pasture because of the prolonged drought in the near future, would the Minister reconsider my suggestion that he reinstate the Feed Freight Assistance Program, at least until we can be assured that pasture is available for livestock in the province?
Mr. Speaker, this is part of the terms of reference of the committee that the Honourable Premier established under the chairmanship of the Minister of Environment, whereby we are mandated to examine on an ongoing basis various programs and facilities whereby we might accommodate in the event that it's necessary further programs.
Cloverbar, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask a supplementary question to the Minister of the Environment, and I'd like to say to the Premier, every time we've gone through this exercise, the politicians somehow or other have made it rain, so let's hope it works this time. But my question to the Minister of Environment, will the permit system be waived for farmers who have to go to, say, rivers or to lakes? Because presently they have to have a permit. What kind of a system is in place to look after that situation?
Mr. Speaker, it was on Tuesday that the Premier announced the creation of this new Water Action Committee, and it was on Tuesday it started to rain in Barhead, honourable members, so I appreciate that endorsation on your part very, very much. But direct response to the honourable member's question, the answer is that there will be a reduced waiting period, and we will eliminate a fair amount of the paperwork that will have to go into it to speed up the process as quickly as possible, recognizing the concern. But at the same time, we also have to be aware that water is not a limitless supply in our province, so that if there were to be large numbers of people attempting to access the same water supply, one would have to manage that as well.
Supplementary, if it rains enough, we could find out whether the minister could walk on it. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like to know whether or not the water program would apply to acreages and to recreation areas like golf courses out in the rural areas.
Mr. Speaker, under the water supply response program that that the Premier announced this morning, there's allocation there for from wells, provisions for wells to be drilled for upwards of a volume of 6,000, and included in the list of eligible people, in addition to farmers and ranchers, will be acreage owners. And I think that's an extremely important question that the member for West Loch Sturgeon raised today, and the information is as important as well, because there are a fair number of citizens in rural Alberta who would not necessarily be gainfully employed in agriculture, but do live in rural Alberta and do not have access to regulated water supplies, as an example, the people who live in Edmonton or Calgary. So that bit of information, I think, would welcome news to them as well in terms of the depleting water supplies. In the event of golf courses, I would suspect that I would want to be in a position to ensure that life does exist in this province, and golf courses do play a very important spot in our society to attract animals, insects and the life, and that is, I think, a statement that I would want to make very clear, that should there be publicly owned and perhaps even some privately funded golf courses that would want to make a petition to us, that I think that we would want to be as flexible as possible in ensuring that we protect life in this province.
Chair recognizes the Attorney General with respect to questions from Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, I want to supplement I think it was the third question raised today by the member for Edmonton Avonmore, and point out that with respect to applications to vary maintenance orders, if an individual applies to the courts to have an order varied, it does not result in cessation of collecting ongoing maintenance payments. Those will still be enforced. It is only the arrears portion that is not collected. Ongoing maintenance enforcement still continues during the course of a hearing as to whether or not an order should be varied. I think that's important information to have for the Assembly.
Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, my information from many women who have been struggling with the court system is that, in fact, the payment is not enforced, and so I would ask the minister if he would be willing to go back to the people in maintenance enforcement to be sure that they are not acting on their own discretion by not continuing to enforce the payment.
Mr. Speaker, I have told the honourable member and members of the Assembly what the policy is, and the policy will be followed.
Chair understands there are some points of order. Edmonton Highlands, followed by West Loch Sturgeon.
Do it today, Nick. Mr. Speaker, my point of order has to do with routine orders of the day in the Assembly. I realize the announcement today with respect to the drought relief program as administered by several different departments is extremely important, and I have no objection to information being discussed in the Assembly on this matter or any other matter. I do note, however, in the last year that there has been a remarkable absence of ministerial statements in the Assembly, and instead issues that would ordinarily have come through that particular channel are being announced outside of the House, over which I have no objection, but the result of which is questions are now being raised by government members of the Assembly with respect to those what would otherwise be ministerial announcements. Now,
don't be shrill, Dick.
Yeah, don't turn this into an Ottawa, you guys.
Beckerville as well as everybody else.
Mr. Speaker, my point of objection is that the parliamentary tradition of question period is that it is meant to be given overwhelmingly to the opposition, and yes, that is the tradition despite the outcry from the government backbenchers. And while there is no objection from my perspective to any member, government included, to asking questions in the oral question period, it does seem to me that two questions on the same matter from the same caucus, which has direct access on a daily basis to Cabinet, is in fact stretching the point. And so I conclude my point of order, Mr. Speaker, to remind the members that I'm not talking about the importance of the individual issue today, which is very important, as are most of the issues, but to point out that there is another mechanism whereby that information can be transmitted to the Assembly and for which no definitive timelines are applied historically, and that is under ministerial statements. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, very briefly, we ought to be reminded that the first two questions of the question period are given over to the Leader of the Opposition, and the third and first two main questions to the Leader of the Opposition, the third and fourth question.
Respect, Leader of the Government House Leader. The Chair is unable to hear some of the comments because some of the noise that's coming from the chamber. So with due respect, I would ask that the back chat just be cut out so we can get on with the points of order to be dealt with. Thank you. Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my point is this, that the first four main questions in the question period are, as it is now, given over to the opposition. Mr. Speaker, there's nowhere in the rules does it say that the question period is totally to be dedicated to members of the opposition. In fact, it is an opportunity for any member of the Assembly, other than those members of Executive Council, to raise questions. And, Mr. Speaker, they can raise a variety of questions covered under Section 359 in Beauchesne, and I think that it should be the privilege of every member to do that.
The Minister of Agriculture.
Just one quick addition, Mr. Speaker, to the point of order raised by the honourable member from Edmonton Highlands, and I can understand her sensitivity, but let me indicate my appreciation to members on this side for asking agricultural questions, because there's a lack of concern from the New Democratic Party.
Sit down. Thank you. Sorry, honourable member, can't recognize you yet. The Chair will now recognize Edmonton Strathcona.
I'm obliged, Mr. Speaker. I simply wish to say that surely it is an abuse of the routine to allow ministerial statements, once it's clear that's what they are, under guise of answering questions.
That's the point.
That's the point. Thank you. First, the Chair would note that no one who contributed to the discussion with this purported point of order bothered to give a citation out of either Erskine May or Beauchesne or standing orders, and therefore the matter is treated as a complaint amongst members. The Chair would also point out that there was something else raised in the comments by Edmonton Highland, that the Chair agrees that there has indeed been fewer and fewer ministerial statements, but that is within the prerogative of the government to act upon or not act upon. With regard to the questions as raised today, Bow Valley was one that dealt with it, and the other member, I forget at the moment, without Wainwright. Together with other members of the House, Vegreville, Westlock Sturgeon came in on supplementaries, and again, Westlock Sturgeon, second supplementary, Vegreville, second supplementary, and Clover Bar with a supplementary. In each case, the Chair was listening to hear what the variation was with regard, and there were no repetitious questions raised, even though the same issue was the same. And shaking of the head, honourable member, perhaps we could peruse Hansard. For example, with Bow Valley, the first question dealt with trucking of water, the second one was with regard to grazing reserves, and the second one was with regard to sunset clause. So there were various aspects of the issue that were being dealt with. One other comment was made with regard to the amount of time that various political parties' members have in question period. The Chair has done a quick computation with the latest stats that we have. As of April 15th, there were 558 questions asked by opposition parties and 100 by government members. So I think that that is indeed within proportion. Chair now recognizes Westlock Sturgeon.
My point of order, Mr. Speaker, is also with regard to questions, although I feel, in all due respect to your first statement here, that the point was not being made of whether the questions were repetitive, but whether the government was just not using it as a method of not only to try to take up time with the opposition members so it couldn't ask questions, but secondly to ask puffball questions to blow up the reputation of the minister. Now, with respect to my own pointed questions, Mr. Speaker, in all due respect, I've noticed in the last while, this is under 359 in Beauchesne, I believe that in all due respect that you or Mr. Speaker or maybe your advisors are doing a bit, are not following the rules the way I would interpret them anyhow, Mr. Speaker, and I respectfully suggest that first of all, right at the beginning paragraphs, is a brief question seeking information which falls within administrative responsibility or of the specific minister to whom it is addressed. Of the specific minister to whom it is addressed would suggest to me that every question is a different one if it's to a different specific minister. In other words, if I ask the same question to all 7 ministers, it's 7 questions. And I shouldn't be said, you should not be able to say that, sorry, that question was asked from McGillicuddy last month, you can't ask it of Mrs. McGillicuddy this month. In other words, a specific minister is the operative word. The second thing, Mr. Speaker, if I may refer to, it also says a question that has, in subclause 8, 359 subclause 8, a question that has previously been answered ought not to be asked again. Has previously been answered. Now, some of the frivolous remarks that, in particular, the Premier, when he lacks any other thing, comes up with, cannot be considered an answer in any way, shape, or form, or some of the other ministers. So I would think, Mr. Speaker, that one of the cases is not whether you have asked the question again, it is whether the response that you'd had was be considered an answer. And I suggest, Mr. Speaker, the way 359 subparagraph 8 reads is very particular. If it had said that they couldn't ask a question again, they would have said that. But they said a question that has been previously answered. So the answer must have something to do with it. A grunt or a fancy answer or a nod is just not an answer, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's up to you to look at it. Finally, Mr. Speaker, if I may make a final comment, I'm sorry about the mix-up in where you denied me the right to ask to sup, but I had every reason to believe when I stood at the same time as the honourable member for Lethbridge West that you had chosen to honour age and the lack of beauty before me at the same time. So I naturally sat down. I'm sorry, I'll turn up my hearing aid a little louder next time, Mr. Speaker.
You're trying hard, Nick. There are
question one, I'm sorry.
The first point of order, first purported point of order, was with respect to repetitious questions. The chair is somewhat intrigued by the embroidery of the member for Westlock Sturgeon with regard to asking the same question of 7 different departments on separate days, and that is a rather interesting concept. The chair was much more concerned about how the repetition was indeed happening with regard to at least the first question as raised by the member for Westlock Sturgeon, because a very strangely similar questions were asked on March the 30th, April the 13th, April the 18th, and April the 19th. The chair, however, in this regard will examine the answer very closely to see exactly how close the questions were indeed being raised. And so it was under Beauchesne citation 359 subsection 12, no, not subsection 12, but sorry, again, it's the repetition rule, and the chair will again find that one and refer it back to the honourable member. There was the second point of order was the matter of perhaps a misunderstanding between the chair and the honourable member. At the time that the honourable member rose, Lethbridge West had stood at the same time. The chair first recognized Westlock Sturgeon, then mentioned that Lethbridge West would follow in the order. The member for Westlock Sturgeon then said, "Go ahead," pointing across the chamber to the member for Lethbridge West, at which time the chair pointed to Westlock Sturgeon and stated you would lose your position on the question. Now, whether that was heard or not, there's a difficulty for the two of us. But on the basis, the chair having first recognized Westlock Sturgeon, that was the time for you to stand, and it is not up to you or any other member of this House to give way to another member, especially during question period. And that is the reason why that event transpired, and that will continue to be the practice if it arises again in the House. There then was another exchange between the chair and Westlock Sturgeon, and it was followed by another one transpired, and one is indeed in the record of the House. One comment was made about the grumpiness of the chair, what was the matter with the chair today. The chair is not at liberty to divulge what's happening in terms of my personal life to see whether I got a grumpy face or not today. The chair also thought that I heard Westlock Sturgeon withdraw that remark. However, in examination of the blues from Hansard, we have another issue, and perhaps this could be clarified for the record, because the language is not what we want to have in the language of Hansard either. But it was heard, and it has been duly recorded. And I don't know if the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon was engaged in prayer or not. Nevertheless, the member is now on the record as saying, "Jesus, you're something or other, perhaps chicken." The chair is not chicken at any time. But perhaps the honourable member could just withdraw the comments from the record of the House, please.
Mr. Chairman, if I know I said the word, "I'm afraid, Jesus," but I don't recall anything else further, and I withdraw.
Member.